Ja'Marr Chase. Here he is talking about the possibility of playing with his former college quarterback, Joe Burrow, in Cincinnati, where Burrow is now the starting quarterback.
I have talked to the Bengals. I don't know how many times I've talked to them, though. But me and Joe, I wouldn't mind going back with Joe. If we go back together, we try and do nothing but get back on chemistry and have some more fun. I think I would have an advantage if I was to play with him, only because we played a couple years. But we'll still have to get that groove back ahead, feel for it again. It's not just going to be there when we throw again. So we have to build that chemistry back up and work hard again.
Remember, this year, under the rules of the second season of the pandemic, teams can talk to as many prospects as they want. They have limits on the number of times they can speak to them, but every team could talk to Ja'Marr Chase if it wants to. So the fact that the Bengals have spoken to him, I would suspect most teams have spoken to him just to do their due diligence and because they can, Charean. But it's clearly an area of need for the Bengals. A.J. Green leaves via free agency. John Ross, a top 10 pick back in 2017, leaves via free agency. They've got a need there, and I'm sure Burrow wouldn't be all that upset about one of his former college teammates joining him in Cincinnati.
Well, I did notice, Mike, on that, and correct me if I'm wrong, did you see the shirt he was wearing? It said Jets on it, right? Did I miss something there? Was he trying to tell us something with the Jets shirt that he was wearing?
Usually I notice those details. I don't think that's New York Jets, though. That could be Winnipeg Jets. Are they still a thing? That's not the Matt Casey's the Jets fan. That doesn't look like an official Jets thing. But I don't know. Maybe he's shooting a shot to be second overall. Zach Wilson, you don't need a franchise quarterback, even though you haven't had one in 50 years in New York. You need another Keyshawn Johnson. Maybe that's what he's angling for. But good eye. I usually pride myself on those meaningless details from press conferences. I'm still mesmerized by the fact that Bruce Arians' face was as red as his shirt in what we saw to start the show,
It was.
keeping in postseason form from 2020. But, look, quarterback number one, quarterback number two, quarterback number three. There's a thought that it's going to be a quarterback at number four. I'd say the Falcons more likely to take a quarterback than a receiver. Could be. Bengals, clear shot at Chase if that's who they want at number 5, leaving Devontae Smith on the board for the Dolphins at number 6 if that's how it all shakes out. So that 4-3-8 solidifies Chase as maybe the top receiver because he's not 170 pounds. I got no problem with Devontae Smith being 170, but if I got a guy who's explosive and dynamic and fast and can catch and he's not 170, that's... I'm not going to fault a guy for being more than 170. I'm not going to fault Smith for being 170. I'm definitely not going to fault a guy for being more than 170, Charean.
Yeah, and Mike, there were some impressive numbers that he had today at the Pro Day, to me, that were bigger than the 4.38, right? I mean, he had a 41-inch vertical, he had an 11-foot broad jump. Those are outstanding numbers for him. And he measured over 6 feet, which I think was important. There was a thought that maybe he was under 6 feet tall. He wasn't. He measured at 6 feet, over 6 feet. So I think that was all positive for him. I would have loved to have seen him play last year with a quarterback other than Joe Burrow, as much as they struggled on offense, just to see what he could have done, to play without Justin Jefferson, to see if he could have had sort of that same year that he had the year before. I realized Joe Burrow was better than any quarterback that LSU threw out there last year. But he had outstanding numbers in 2019. He was the best receiver in football. He was better than Justin Jefferson, who was on the same team. And we saw what Justin Jefferson did when he got to the NFL. So everyone loves this guy. They think he's going to be a star. I think it's a great receiver class. I'm not sure, kind of like last year, Mike, we saw 6 receivers go in the first round. And I don't know that you can go wrong. There's going to be 1 or 2 who are going to be better than the others. I mean, we saw it this year. Justin Jefferson was a 22nd overall pick, and he was the best of that group last year. CeeDee Lamb had a really good year. The first 2 guys drafted, Henry Ruggs and Jerry Jeudy, didn't have quite so good a year. So I love this guy. I know NFL scouts love this guy. I'm not going to be surprised if he's the first non-quarterback off the board, Mike. And wherever he goes, I think he's going to be a standout player. And you mentioned the Bengals. He would fit right in with Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins next year, and they would have a good group of receivers for Joe Burrow.
Extra pressure, higher expectations to be that first receiver off the board. And I've argued in the past, it's actually better for a receiver to go lower than he thought he should have gone. It lights a little bit of a fire. It makes him more determined. When you're that first guy, you've got no real reason. Maybe that's what the Jets shirt is about. Maybe he's trying to convince himself he should be number 2.
Yeah.
So if he is number 5, he can still be pissed off about something, even though he's the first receiver off the board. Now, that 4.3840, if that number sounds familiar, that was 15 years ago. Vernon Davis out of Maryland ran a 4.38, but he's a tight end. Today, Florida, the top tight end on the board, Kyle Pitts, 4.44. Not as fast as Davis, but pretty darn fast. And the 83-inch wingspan, the longest of any receiver or tight end in this year's draft. Charean, there's a thought that this is a guy who's going to go very high. Tight ends, typically, now we know a couple of years ago, TJ Hawkinson went top 10 for the Lions, but typically you see them go later than receivers. The best receivers go before the best tight ends for the most part, but this is a guy who could be right in the thick of things with the first receivers off the board.
Absolutely, Mike, and he's going to be a weapon for somebody. You know, he finished 10th in the Heisman race for good reason. He did have a little bit of a few injuries last year, some lingering stuff. I know he had a concussion at one point, and he had some lingering injury. Of course, in college, you never know what they have, but teams are going to check that out and be thoroughly convinced that he's 100% now. But put up great numbers last year with Kyle Trask as his quarterback, and I just think somebody's going to get an outstanding tight end. I know Greg Olsen, I saw he tweeted today and called him a really special talent, and Greg Olsen would know special talents at that position. Matt Rule, by the way, was the first coach to offer Kyle Pitts a scholarship coming out of high school. So I think there's interest there, but he's probably going to be gone. If the Panthers want him, Mike, to replace Greg Olsen, what Greg Olsen did, I realize he didn't play there last year, but what he did in his history in Carolina, they're going to have to trade up to get him.
Kyle Pitts addressed the question of whether or not the team that currently holds the 4th pick in the draft, and a team that knows a thing or two about having a great tight end, guy named Tony Gonzalez, has he heard from the Falcons? Here's Pitts on that subject.
I did talk to them on Zoom a couple of times, and I talked to them ahead of the day, and they're saying they have interest in me. And after today, we'll get back on another Zoom and try, they'll try and learn more about myself. So I feel like they're pretty interested in this. It will be a dream come true to be top 5 or the first non-quarterback to come off the board.
Yeah, that would be something if the Falcons would take him at number 4. The question the Falcons would have to ask themselves, could they trade that spot to a quarterback-needy team like the Carolina Panthers doing business in the division, drop down to 8 and still get Pitts? That's part of the risk that you take, because maybe the next pick off the board is Pitts if you do slide down a few spots. But the Falcons, that's an area of need for them. They got so many areas of need. That's why the idea of them taking a guy like Trey Lance, and Sims has heard the talk about Lance possibly being the Falcons' choice. When you've got a bunch of needs, the idea that you're taking a quarterback that's going to sit behind Matt Ryan for a year, maybe 2, probably 1, who knows. But you'd think that there are other areas that you need to address if you want to be competitive this year. Maybe they don't want to be as competitive as they can be, and they're thinking more about building for the future. Regardless, they're sitting there at 4, and as Pitts said, Charean, they're interested in him.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting, Mike, to see where the quarterbacks stop. And I'm going to be surprised if a quarterback doesn't go at 4, whether it's the Falcons or another team. You know, the Falcons could certainly trade down if there's a team interested. Like you said, the Panthers possibly moving up to get a quarterback there. But I just, those quarterbacks always go higher than you think they're going to go. And I just think we're going to have a run on quarterbacks early, and it's going to be an interesting conversation to see where the next guy falls. Is it Kyle Pitts? Is it Jamar Chase? Is it Devontae Smith? Who is it, that next guy? And I think everyone's pretty much agreed from what I've heard from scouts that Chase is the better prospect than Smith right now, just based on his size. So I'm going to expect that it's going to be Jamar Chase, the next guy off the board after the quarterbacks. But the question becomes, where do the quarterbacks stop? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it even later than that? Do teams get scared like the 49ers did and say, hey, if we want a quarterback, we're going to have to move up to get one?
It would be amazing if the run on quarterbacks goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's entirely possible with the Bengals having to trade out, because surely they would not be taking a quarterback for the second straight year with a top 10 pick, not after the way Joe Burrow performed last year. A team in the first round that I think it's safe to say will not be taking a tight end. Although, who knows with what they did in free agency. Jonnu Smith right out of the gates, Hunter Henry the next day. Patriots getting back to having multiple competent tight ends.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.